this is the tactic. It is harassment, it's intimidation. It is meant to take our eyes off the stories that we need to be doing.
Judges sentenced former media tycoon Jimmy Lai to 20 years in prison.
Mzia Amaglobeli, a Georgian journalist and media director, was arrested in January 2025 after joining anti-government protests and sentenced to 2 years in prison.
So hello again, I'm Alessandra, editor-in-chief of Reuters, and I'm pleased, in fact I'm thrilled and honored, I should say, that to be back to speak with two women who every day contend with and battle against the tactics that are used around the world to silence the media. Maria Ressa, she doesn't need introduction, but I'm going to introduce you anyway, one of the leading global voices for press freedom, and for her work standing up to dictators and warning the world tirelessly that complacency is the enemy of democracy. She, of course, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2021. Caoilfhionn Gallagher is a formidable international human rights lawyer, a fiery defender of journalists in courtrooms from Iran, Kuwait, Georgia, and more. She has secured the freedom of more than 85 wrongly imprisoned journalists, bloggers, cartoonists, and a rapper, I believe. A warm welcome. So, Maria, I mean, you know this issue firsthand, obviously, having been the target of a long legal harassment campaign as founder of the digital news organization Rappler. You took on then Filipino President Duterte for his extrajudicial killings, and you've had to post bail 11 times. I had 10, but it was actually 11 times, just to do your job. And of course, as we saw in the video, you're not alone. You know, even as media organizations newsrooms have had more tools to do reporting, to do their journalism, there have been ever more tools to obstruct journalists. So in the years that you have been doing this tireless work, you know, what are the trends that you're seeing? How are the tools to stop journalists or to attempt to stop journalists from doing the work? How have they changed, and what are we facing now?
Oh my gosh, so much. First of all, thank you to Reuters for doing the drug war series, right? You won awards for that as well. But look, I'm a live shot reporter. I'll do 3 points, right? The first, physically. I mean, since October 2023, this is the most number of journalists killed in Gaza, dating all the way back to the US Civil War, the 2 world wars, Vietnam, Afghanistan, post 9/11, Afghanistan, right? Yugoslavia combined. So physically. The second is virtually. You mentioned, you know, I was getting, and Caoilfhionn had worked on this, I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour. And when I went to the platforms to say, you know, this is not normal, this isn't right, they were like, you're a public figure. We have a Bill of Rights in the Philippines patterned after the United States that shouldn't have been allowed, but that was in 2016. It's gotten significantly worse since then because that was AI of social media. Since then, now you have you know, not just the chat bots, but you have agentic AI and multi-agentic AI, right? So there's like an Ouroboros, a snake eating its tail because of, starting with the attacks against journalists, narrative warfare, which we can talk about, right? You're targeted, if you're a journalist, because you hold the line, because we determine fact from fiction, and none of the tech that rules our world is actually anchored in facts. That's 2. And the last one, which I just finished a manuscript for my next book. It's called The Fight Back. And in this one, this is the moment that I crystallized the fusion of state power with tech power. When you put this together, think infotech meets biotech, think tipping point, right? This is a time when we're not sure whether journalism will survive. Certainly all of our data is telling us it's existential for us. And do our people still have agency? But wait, so before I depress you all, it's been a decade since the attacks against Rappler began. That was when Rodrigo Duterte was elected in 2016. Caoilfhionn has been my pro bono lawyer for a very long time, so there are pro bono lawyers who are there. But I'm here. Out of the 11 cases, I still have one left, so I have to ask the Philippine Supreme Court for approval to travel. After the Nobel, thankfully, they give me approval to travel. And the man who tried to jail me, Duterte, is in prison in The Hague.
So, as Maria said, Caoilfhionn is her lawyer. So, Caoilfhionn, if I ask Maria something and she starts to talk, which she's wont to do, you just stop her if she can't, if she shouldn't. Really the same question to you, Caoilfhionn, which is, lawfare against journalists is not new, it's not isolated, but it's getting more pervasive. And, what tactics are you seeing that, just from the legal side, because Maria lives them, and then you have to swoop in and from the legal side and protect Maria and others?
Sure. Well, first it's worth saying that the joke about Maria is deadly serious, because although Maria is free, there is a gag order, so she's not actually able to talk about her own cases. And that's a way to silence a journalist, right? She can be on a stage, but she's restricted in what she can say. I suppose I would say we quite often at Truth Tellers have talked about the authoritarian playbook, but actually I think the authoritarian playbook is the wrong phrase to use, because there's such a blurring of the line between the tactics that are being used by authoritarian regimes and in democracies. Just in January you think about the knock on the door, federal agencies arriving because of a journalist reporting, and that's in Minnesota. So we're in a position where the line is getting very blurred. So I suppose what I would highlight are three trends that I'm tending to see in the last 12 months in particular. The first is the discrediting playbook. So the idea of undermining the journalist. So you undermine the messenger, and therefore you undermine the message. Now that ties into what Maria was talking about the sheer number of journalists who've been killed in the last year. We've seen a tactic. We're both on the board of the Committee to Protect Journalists. CPJ has been doing a lot of documenting on the tactic of slandering, discrediting, and killing, and then slandering those who died afterwards. That's also something we saw here in Europe, in Malta, in 2017. My client's Daphne Caruana Galizia's family, similarly we saw, she was discredited before her death. There was an attempt to undermine her, to dehumanize her. So it's a discreditation, dehumanizing, and then it makes it easier to feed that culture of impunity. But we also see that discrediting playbook in a whole range of other cases. So Maria, for example, instead of them just going after Maria ostensibly for her journalism, she got called a tax evader. Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong got called a fraudster. Jose Ruben Zamora in Guatemala got called a money launderer. And that's very deliberate, because if you call someone a fraudster or a tax evader or a money launderer, a lot of people will think there's no smoke without fire, may believe it, and it undermines the messenger and therefore undermines the message. So that's the first thing. Second tactic, I think, is the immigration playbook. Probably don't have time to go into a lot of the detail, but it's worth saying that one of the real trends that we're now seeing is simply deporting or refusing visas, the weaponization of visas, weaponization of the immigration system to target people for their journalism. Again, something we've seen for many decades working in countries elsewhere, but now we're seeing it in Western democracies too. So that's a very worrying trend. And then the third one, this is not very catchy, but I would probably call it the ecosystem strangulation playbook. And the idea is that rather than just targeting the journalist, you target their support system. So you go after their lawyers, for example. You go after their sources of funding. You have bring in foreign agents laws, which target their sources of investment, for example. And if you do that, you can control the journalist. And just on the lawyers, just final point on that, I was privileged enough in 2021 to be in Oslo with Maria when she won the Nobel Peace Prize, and an absolutely electrifying speech. But right in the first minute of that speech, she gave a chilling figure, which I don't think most people are aware of, which is that in the first 5 years of Duterte being in power in the Philippines, 22 journalists had been killed. Do you know how many lawyers have been killed in that time in the Philippines? 63. So there's a real tactic where you target both the journalist and you target the lawyers too. I appreciate this is a lawyer saying, won't someone think of the lawyers? But it's an important part of the picture to undermine the journalists, to cut out their support system.
Yeah, I mean, as we saw, I mean, in the panel before about local journalism, this is even harder for news organizations that don't have a big structure behind them, you know, so much harder, or for news organizations, I mean, like ours, that have journalists who are working in their own countries, so they don't even have a foreign government, you know, behind them. So certainly we're seeing this. But, you know, in your Nobel acceptance speech, Maria, you said, "The more I was attacked for my journalism, the more resolute I became." But we know that for so many journalists, actually, the harassment, the intimidation tactics, it actually doesn't harden them. It silences them. You know, we're in a room full of journalists, of media owners, of editors. You know, how do you fight this, those who are not able to be like you?
No, I think everyone can be like me, right? Like, actually, you begin with the people you trust. That's how, look, managing Rappler, which is a news group of about 100 people, right, was so much easier when we were under attack, believe it or not, because the mission of journalism was so clear to us. The entire organization rallied around it. And those of us who were 50 and above, I'm 62 now, and the median age in Rappler is 23 years old, so you can imagine, right? We're very young, and 63% women. They just, when the mission is so clear, you don't give up. And I think that's the first lesson that we learned, is that don't voluntarily give up your rights. I mean, this is, Tim Snyder said that, right, and other things. But for us in Rappler in the Philippines, the stories that we did when we were under attack, Reuters, again, I will go to the drug war, because the more who did it, many of you in the audience helped shine the light on what we were going through. I think without you, I may have wound up in jail, right? But what we learned during that time period, the stories we did, those are the ones that are in evidence now at the ICC, right? So the journalists have a role to play in stopping impunity, stopping accountability. But I think more than that, even as we talk about how difficult it is to be a journalist, you've heard today, all day on the stage, there is no better time to be a journalist, because the Nobel lecture, that really, she was like going through it with me at the morning before I was giving it. But in that Nobel lecture, I talked about how we're standing on the rubble of the world that was, and you have to think that that is exactly what's happening. You have to throw out the way you've done things in the past, and you rebuild. You build better. And that's what we were forced to do. I think that's what we have to do with the technology that literally is choking traffic to all our news website, right? So this is exciting in a weird way, right? Very inspiring. This is the moment. At the UN General Assembly last year, the 80th anniversary of the UN, I called this an information Armageddon. Because I'm an optimist. I didn't call it an information apocalypse, right? That means the battle is over. The battle is now. So if you're a journalist today, man, this is the time to jump in.
Well, I mean, not to plug, but I am going to plug, you know, the fellowship that we have in investigative journalism. Every year we have more and more young people wanting to do this kind of work. So I think, you know, what you say is absolutely true. Caoilfhionn, less than 2 weeks ago, you won the freedom of the Kuwaiti-American journalist Ahmed Shihab Eldin.
We were together here.
And he had been detained in Kuwait for 2 months, and the Committee to Protect Journalists, I also am on the board, was just one of the many organizations that appealed for his release. And you also represent Zia Amaglobeli, as your tag shows, the Georgian editor sentenced to 2 years in prison. The question I have for you is, how much does rallying global opinion bear weight in these cases? When is it best to drum up public outrage, and when is it best to stay silent? And we have, I mean, I can say, you know, we at Reuters have faced this, unfortunately, many times with our journalists either being in jail or under duress. And sometimes, for us, we have seen that going public has been the right thing to do because it has, you know, rallied rage, and that has had an effect on a government. But sometimes, actually, the best thing we've done is very quietly work behind the scenes. So talk us through, especially because this is sort of news you can use, you all folks. I mean, talk us through if this ever happens to any of you.
Pro bono legal advice.
And of course, one of the very difficult things, I mean, many of my cases are public, but many of my cases never hit the headlines, never known, you know, and someone quietly got returned. So it's a real lawyer's answer, but it's true. The answer is it depends. You know, it depends on the regime. It depends on the journalist. It depends on their circumstances. So I've recently had a case which has involved someone who was being very badly mistreated in custody, was a victim of torture, had just recently been released from a situation of torture where they're very, very lucky to have survived, to being under house arrest. And actually there, the call for the family and for the individual in question was whether they should push it by trying to secure their release from the country, from house arrest, which might have resulted in them going back into custody. An impossible decision. And they took a decision not, in fact, to go public, even though the game changer in that case is likely to be going public, but by going public, it runs a risk of them being put back inside. So that's very difficult. Ahmed, who you just saw on screen there, I can tell you if Ahmed's case was not public and there hadn't been international outrage, he would still be in prison in Kuwait. So that is an example of a case where actually, initially, there were some quiet efforts behind the scenes for a number of weeks, and once I got instructed with a very brilliant team, my colleague Kate Gibson, who's fantastic, another Irish woman with an impossible to pronounce name, Niamh Ní Aongasa as well, we thought that on that case, just when we weighed up all the factors, in fact being loud and screaming from the rooftops was the right thing to do, because he's an American citizen, he's being detained in Kuwait, Kuwait is a US ally, and we knew that there would be outrage at the idea that Kuwait, attempting to present itself as being a US ally, was treating an American citizen in this way. And rightly, that's what actually ultimately got him out. The blue passport is what got him out at the end of the day. And I know that there's not a lot of love for this US administration in this room, but I can tell you on this particular case, the US administration and US officials, particularly in the Special Envoy of Hostage Affairs, are what got him home and got him out to his family. So they're examples of quite extreme different cases where it depends. You mentioned Zia Ahmed-Lobeli. I'm wearing the badge here. Maria's been a great supporter of that case. I just want to mention this. So Zia is an incredible woman, another woman of a certain age, turned 50 last year while in prison. She's been in prison in Georgia since January 2025. And make no mistake, she is in prison for conspiracy to commit journalism. She is in prison because of being a journalist. And not enough people know her name, not enough people know her case. And I can tell you, in 25 years of doing this work, in every single case where you secure someone's release, it's quite simple. It involves using the leverage that you've got and ensuring that for the detaining state, it becomes more trouble than it's worth for them to continue detaining the person. And we have real power in relation to Georgia. Many of the Georgian Dream officials who are responsible for detaining her have property here in London. They've got financial interests across Europe. They've got financial interests in Canada, in the US. We have a system of Magnitsky sanctions, which we could and should be using far, far better. And if I can give a shout out to one person in the audience when we're talking about public attention, there's a brilliant young woman in the audience called Irma, who is Zia's colleague.
Batu Melebi.
From Batu Melebi. And she is here for her first trip to London, her first trip to the UK, at grave risk herself, in order to be Zia's voice while Zia is in prison. And you may see her. She's got extremely bright red hair along the lines of your very beautiful suit, Alessandra. And the reason is, if you ask her why her hair is that colour, is because Georgia is attempting to silence journalists, to make them cower away in the corner. And she thought, what's a way in which I can be as visible as possible? And that's why she's got hair that colour. And bravo to you.
Well, maybe she can stand up for it. She's in the back. There you go. I mean, also on this point, I would imagine that for those in jail, knowing that the world is out there, that we saw this with Evan Gershkovich in jail, and we had this years ago with Wallone and Chassou. They knew, knowing from inside jail that you have a news organization that hasn't just abandoned you, and that the world is rallying for you for your own mental health inside and your protection and your managing it is very important.
And a really critical thing to say is all too often people think with these cases that it's just in or out, it's binary, and actually a lot of the time shining a light on the case can actually be protective. So while the person remains in custody, you speak to Peter Greste, you speak to a whole range of people who were in custody and who then got out and who say that when there was a tension on their case, it was protective and it resulted in them having better conditions, it resulted in less torture, less mistreatment. So that's critical.
I'm going to put you on the spot really quickly. So in which countries was it better to stay silent?
I mean, it is complicated, because I'm sorry to be such a but it is complicated. But in general, it tends to be better to be loud, but not all the time. Right. And also critically, some cases you can be loud at certain times and not at others. And I'm a big believer in the idea that sometimes the dagger on the wall in Act 1 is worth more than actually using the dagger in Act 2. Sometimes the threat of going public can be very, very powerful and can result in getting a result, particularly from a country that's interested in its own reputation management and doesn't want to be seen as a torturer, as a detainer, as an arbitrary detention regime.
I want to go back to something that you both touched upon, which is the narrative. We've talked about lawfare against journalists, and almost things like libel now seems almost quaint, right, compared to sort of this narrative warfare.
Yeah.
How it's more difficult to battle. What is the worst that you've faced, and what is the worst that you've had to defend? Just really quickly, because unfortunately then I have one last question for you.
Okay, this is like a live shot. So narrative warfare, right? In every country around the world, the death of democracy is death by 1,000 cuts. And the last one that's easy is 143 executive orders in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Each one of those executive orders was a content trigger online that triggered the narrative warfare. That's the first phase. The second phase, going down the funnel for the managers, that second funnel is a breakdown of the checks and balances, meaning the breakdown of institutions. We're seeing that. And then it goes down to the last one, which is strategic corruption and kleptocracy. So if you're a journalist looking at the breakdown of democracy, follow the money, right? We gotta follow the money. But sorry, on our end, look, I mean, it's been almost a decade that we've been going back and forth. I just want to say on that one, there are times when we're very loud, and there are times when we're super silent.
Yeah, that's right. You've often got to ensure that there's a respectable off-ramp. So sometimes you need to be quiet at key times.
Right. So we have to end. So I have a last question for both of you, which is, we know, and that's why we're all here. There's no freedom without freedom of the press. And when we talk about global freedom of the press, and you touched upon this when you said this is actually a great moment to do what we do. Yeah. So what gives you hope?
Oh my gosh, so much. Look at this room, right? I think we carry the tradition, but the younger generation is stepping up. And please don't call me an influencer ever. No offense to influencers.
She says as she's like taking videos like the whole time.
But journalist, right? Like, I'm a journalist. That is who I am. There are different. There's standards and ethics. There's a sense of mission in everything we do. And we're willing to go to jail for what we do. We're willing to take the consequences. Sorry. What's the hope? I'm the co-chair of the UN's scientific panel on AI. We need to go to the upstream problem. It needs to be radical collaboration. News organizations, you gotta stop working on your own. We need to come together to defend facts. Because when it is a battle for facts, journalism is activism.
So in terms of hope, look, you've got to be a relentless optimist to do this job and to do this job too. I'm a big believer in that old phrase, they tried to bury us, they didn't realize we were seeds. What gives me absolute hope are the people who've come out, who've walked through fire and come out the other side. People like my friend Jason Rezine, people like Maria, people who've come out and now are spending all of their time campaigning for others. So those of you who were in Perugia at the International Journalism Festival a couple of weeks ago, there was Alsu Kurmasheva, who was sitting in one of Putin's prisons until August 2024 when she got released, and then makes it her life's mission to go around campaigning for other people. And actually, this is going to sound like an odd thing to say, but I've got at home a treasured collection of T-shirts which I wear as pajamas at bedtime, and they are the T-shirts which are free person X who's already been freed. So I've got free Toumaj, the rapper. I've just got a new free Ahmed T-shirt, which we never needed to deploy because we got him out, which is amazing. Free Yasser, all of those. And I'm hoping that I'm soon going to have a new T-shirt to add to my collection, free Zia.
Well.